Evil has a way of staining the ground where it walks. Long after the blood is scrubbed away and the bodies are buried, something lingers, seeping into the soil, waiting for anyone foolish enough to cross its path. They say the earth remembers kindness, but it remembers cruelty much more clearly. The Butcher's Shadow is one of those memories. The story begins in the 1930s, in a town too small to keep its name on most maps. It was the kind of place where families kept to themselves, where the same surnames filled the graveyard rows for 100 years, and it was in that quiet town that Elias Gant lived. To the world, he was a butcher, a broad-shouldered man with hands built for cleavers and saws. He sold meat from his shop on the corner, smiling as he wrapped paper parcels, tipping his hat to the ladies on Sunday mornings. But behind the locked doors of his cellar, Elias Gant carved more than cattle. The first bodies were never found. The missing were chalked up to wanderers, drifters passing through, but the whispers began soon enough. A farmhand who went into town for supplies and never returned. A school teacher who left after dusk and was never seen again. Always at night, always near the butcher's block. When suspicion finally fell on Gant, the sheriff led a search. What they found in that cellar was worse than anything the town had imagined. Hooks lined the walls, not empty, but heavy with what remained of his victims. Bones stacked neatly in boxes, strips of flesh salted and labelled. He had been doing it for years, harvesting life the same way he harvested livestock. They hanged him quickly, without trial. The sheriff himself tied the knot. But the people of the town never spoke of it openly again. The shop was torn down, the cellar buried in concrete, the ground left empty. They thought it would end there, that burying the man and his place together would stop the rot. It didn't, because Elias Gant did not leave cleanly. The first signs came within months. Children walking home after dusk swore they smelled blood in the air, coppery and sharp. Dogs refused to pass the empty lot, whining and pulling at their leashes. A traveller renting a room nearby claimed he woke to the sound of cleavers striking wood, though no butcher remained in town. Then came the visions. People began to see a figure at the edge of alleys at the far end of the street. Broad-shouldered, wearing a blood-stained apron, face hidden in shadow. He never spoke, never chased. He only stood and stared. But when the witness blinked, he was gone, leaving behind the scent of iron and rot. At first, the townsfolk told themselves it was imagination, guilt twisting their minds. They had hanged the man, they had buried his work. But then the killing started again. Animals at first. Cows bled dry in their pens, neat as though by a professional hand. Pigs found gutted, skinned, left arranged in strange patterns in the dirt. Then people. A farm girl walking home from church, a store clerk closing late. Their bodies were found posed like slaughter, stripped and arranged as if they were cuts of meat. But Elias Gant had been dead for years. The sheriff organised another hunt, though this time they had no man to blame. They searched the woods, the fields, the abandoned barns. They found nothing, only more bodies, more bones, more evidence that the killer knew the work well. Hooks and saws, knives, all the tools of a butcher, but no butcher lived there anymore. They called it the Butcher's Shadow, because that was all it could be. Not Gant himself, but what remained of him, etched into the ground and the air and the minds of those who dared to walk too close. The town emptied slowly. Families packed wagons, boarded trains, leaving behind their houses, their shops, their dead. The place became a hollow shell, another ghost town swallowed by the years. But the Butcher's Shadow did not fade. It travelled with the land, seeping into the cracks, waiting for someone new to stumble into its grasp. And stumble, they did. Hikers found the place first, decades later, wandering through overgrown streets, marvelling at the decay. They did not marvel long. Their journals tell the same story. The smell of blood in the air, the creak of meat hooks swaying, though no wind blew, the feeling of being watched by something just out of sight. Some describe finding fresh cuts of meat laid across stone counters in ruined kitchens, though no living butcher remained. Others swore they saw footprints in the dust, wide and heavy, leading into the shadows. Not all the hikers returned. Hunters told of shooting deer near the town's edge, only to find the carcasses gone minutes later, dragged into cellars that no longer had doors. A photographer once spent a night there, determined to capture proof of the supernatural. His camera was found weeks later, cracked and blood-stained, the film inside showing frame after frame of a dark figure growing closer, cleaver in hand, until the final image was nothing but red. The photographer was never found. The shadow has rules. They say it hunts after dark, never in daylight, though those who linger until dusk rarely escape. It begins with a smell, thick, metallic, unmistakable. Then the sound steel on wood, the slow scrape of knives across blocks. Then the feeling, being weighed, measured, appraised like livestock. If you stay after the third warning, it comes. Witnesses speak of footsteps behind them, steady, deliberate, too heavy to be human. They feel breath at their neck, cold and damp, carrying the stink of rot. They see the figure at the edge of their vision, apron soaked, cleaver glinting. But if they turn to face him, they see nothing but shadow. The shadow does not always kill. Some it marks instead, leaving them haunted. They wake at night to the sound of cleavers in their kitchens, to hooks swaying in the corners of their rooms. They find cuts on their skin they cannot explain, neat slices as though made by a skilled hand. Some descend into madness, carving shapes into their walls until nothing is left but splinters. Others vanish entirely, their homes left with doors ajar and knives missing from the block. The question has always been the same. Is the butcher's shadow a ghost, or something worse? If it is a ghost, then Alaskant's cruelty was strong enough to anchor him beyond death, a spirit feeding forever on blood. But some say it is not Gant at all. They whisper that the act of slaughter, repeated so many times in that cellar, carved open a doorway, that something came through, wearing its shape, wielding his tools, continuing the work in his stead. If so, then what haunts those empty streets is not the butcher's ghost, but something older, hungrier, using his memory as a mask. What is certain is this: the killings never stop. They come in cycles every few decades, when the place is rediscovered, when the curious wander in. Always the same signs, always the same end. Blood soaking into soil that has already tasted too much of it. And the earth remembers. They say if you walk the ruins after dark, you can hear the sound of saws and hooks rising from the ground itself. You can smell the iron tang, even when no blood has been spilled. And if you linger long enough, if you are foolish enough to ignore the warnings, you will see him too. Broad shoulders, blood-stained apron, cleaver catching the moonlight. He will not run. He will not speak. He will only stand and wait, because he knows you cannot leave. Not really. Once you've stepped onto that ground, once you've breathed the air thick with his memory, you belong to him. The butcher's shadow is patient, and one day, when you are alone, when the night is quiet and the air grows still, you will smell the copper tang of blood. You will hear the scrape of knives against wood, and you will realize that he has found you, even far from the place where it began. Because Elias Gant may be dead, but the work lives on, and shadows never stay buried.